Good Monday morning. I'm reading an excerpt of Jesus' first sermon that Luke records in Luke chapter 4. It may not be Jesus' first sermon, but it's the first one that Luke records. And it doesn't end well. Let me just read a few verses of it, beginning at verse 16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and as was his custom, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read. And the book of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. And he opened the book and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are downtrodden, and to proclaim the favorable year of the Lord." So far, so good. The people are tracking with him well and appreciating what he's got to say. But I'm going to skip down to verse 25. Jesus continues and he says, "But I say to you in truth, there were many widows in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the sky was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, when a great famine came over all the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath in the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. And all in the synagogue were filled with rage as they heard these things, and they rose up and cast him out of the city, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their city had been built, in order to throw him down the cliff. But passing through their midst, he went on their way." I remember my first sermon. It was Youth Sunday at our church, and the pastor asked several of us teenagers to give a 5 or 10 minute message. So when it came my turn to speak, I was very nervous, and I started talking really fast, and I crammed a 10-minute sermon into 1.5 minutes, and I didn't even have to take a breath. It didn't go well. And I remember the last sermon I preached just yesterday. And it was a disaster too, and every sermon in between them was a disaster too. But I don't remember anybody wanting to kill me for what I said. What got these people so upset that they wanted to kill Jesus over it? He started out well, talking about God's favor toward the blind and the poor and the captives, and you can take that literally or you can take it spiritually, or both. And that's okay. But then when he started talking about God's grace, God's favor, God's desire for the welfare of the Gentiles, you know, those people that are different from us, that we don't like, he'd gone too far. And they couldn't accept that, even though he's preaching from their own Bible. But I'm glad he said that, because those Gentiles, that's you and I. We are included in his desire for God's grace and favor and blessing for us. And if we want to follow Jesus and become more like Jesus, then we must have the heart of Jesus for the poor and the downtrodden and the blind and the prisoners and the disadvantaged, but also his desire for his grace and favor and welfare to, those people that we don't like, be they a different race or a different political party or a different language. Just as God wanted us to be saved, he wants them to be saved too. And if we would have the heart of God, that would be our desire for their welfare as well. Ash the cat tells me it's time to quit. You have a good day.